Hello, my name is Joshua Mugabe. I welcome you to Circulatory System. What is circulation? Circulation is the movement of substances like nutrients and gases within the blood vessels, cavities through the organism. How do all animals have a circulatory system? Not all animals have a circulatory system. Polyphela, Cnidaria, Platyhelminths, and nematodes. In these, there are pseudocoelm fluids but no vessels. A vesicular animal, echinoderms, do not have true circulatory system either. What is the alternative means of transport of substances in animal without a circulatory system? Why is blood important for larger animals? In animals that do not present circulatory system, the transport of substances occurs by cell-to-cell diffusion. The blood is a fundamental means of substance transport for the large animals. Since they are animals, they are those tissues distant from each other and from the environment, thus making diffusion impossible. What are the two types of circulatory systems? Circulatory system can be classified into open circulatory system and closed circulatory system. What is an open circulatory system? An open circulatory system is the one in which blood does not circulate inside the blood vessels, but it also falls in the cavities that irrigate tissues. The open circulatory system blood pressure is low, and generally the blood has low cellularity. Arthropods, mollusks, the cephalopods are exception. Protochordates are open circulatory system. What is a closed circulatory system? A closed circulatory system is the one in which blood circulates inside the blood vessels. For this reason, the blood pressure is higher in animals with closed circulatory system. Cellularity of the blood is also higher with specific blood vessels. The closed circulatory system is a feature of annelids, cephalomollusks, and vertebrates. What are the advantages of the closed circulatory system over the open circulatory system? The closed circulatory system is more efficient. Since blood circulates inside a blood vessel, it can do it with more pressure, reaching further distance between the organs where hematosis happens and the peripheral tissues. In addition, the circulatory speed also heightened, making possible of oxygen supply to great consuming tissues like the muscle tissues that then can perform faster movements. Animals with open circulatory system, with the exception of insects that do gas exchange independently from circulation, are slower and have low metabolic rates. What is the difference between octopus and mussels regarding to their circulatory system? How does the difference influence the mobility of these animals? Cephalopod mollusks and octopus and squids have closed circulatory system, with the blood pumped under pressure, flowing within vessels. Bivalve mollusks like mussels and oysters have open circulatory system, lunar circulatory system, where blood flow under low pressure, since it falls in cavities of the body and does not only circulate within the blood vessel. Mollusks with closed circulatory system are larger, agile, and can actively move. Mollusks with open circulatory system are smaller, slow, and some are practically sensile. Why? Even though they have an open circulatory system, the flying insects like flies beat their wings with great speed. In insects, circulatory system is open, but the system does not participate in gas exchange process and in oxygen supply to the tissues. Gases go in and out through an independent structure system that allows direct contact of cells within the ambient air. Therefore, an insect can supply a great oxygen demand its fast-beating wings muscles, even having open circulatory system. What are the typical components of the closed circulatory system? A typical components of closed circulatory system are the blood vessels, within which blood circulates, arteries, veins, and capillaries, the pumping organ, which is the heart, and the blood-like fluid. How does the heart impel blood? The heart is a muscular organ that contains chamber, the right atrium and the left ventricle, left atrium and the right ventricle, through which blood passes. The blood enters the heart in the atria and goes to the ventricles and then leaves the organs. The blood is pumped out of the heart by the contraction of the muscle fibers that form the ventricular walls. The contraction reduces the ventricle volume, thus increasing the internal pressure, and the blood then flows to exit the vessels, the pulmonary artery or for the right ventricle, aorta for the left ventricle. When the ventricle muscles fiber distend, the ventricle region, their original size, receives new blood flowing coming from the atria. What is the difference between systole and diastole? Systole and diastole are the two stages in which the cardiac cycle is divided. Systole is a stage when the contraction of the ventricle muscle fiber occurs and the ventricles are emptied. Diastole is the stage of the cardiac cycle when the ventricle muscle fiber distend and the ventricles are filled with blood. What are the arterial vessels, arteries, arterioles? Arterial vessels are veiny blood vessels that carries blood from the heart to the tissues. Arteries and arterioles are arterial vessels. Arterioles are thinner arteries that end in capillaries. Not all arteries, however, contain arterial blood, highly oxygenated blood. The pulmonary artery and its ramification arteries carry blood from the right heart ventricle to the lungs, containing venous blood. What are venous vessels, veins, and venues? Venous vessels are every blood vessel that carries blood from the tissue to the heart. Veins, venues, are venous vessels. Venues are thin veins that continues with the capillaries. In general, venous vessels carry venous blood. Pulmonary veins carry blood from the lungs to the left atrium of the heart, however, contains arterial blood. What are the capillaries and vascular system of the vascular system? Capillaries are small blood vessels that perform exchange of substances between the blood and the body tissue. Capillaries are neither arteries nor are they veins, since they have distinct features. In capillaries, walls are made of single layer of endothelial cells, through which substances are exchanged. These vessels receive blood from the arteries, arterioles, and drain it to the venues. What is the part of the vascular system that performs exchange of gases and other substances with the tissue? Only capillaries perform exchange of gases and substances with the tissues. Are arteries and veins constituted of more muscle tissue? How different are the walls of these two types of blood vessels? The arterial system has thicker muscle walls, since with the arteries, blood circulates under high pressure. The veins have more flaccid than arteries. From the lumen to the exterior layer, both types of vessel are made of endothelial muscle tissues and connective tissues. In both endothelium is a single layer of cells. In arteries, muscle tissue portion is thicker than in vein. In these vessels, the external connective tissue is thicker than in arteries. Arteries are the pulsating blood vessels. Arterial pulse can be felt in medical examination, for example by palpation of the radial artery in the internal and lateral face of the wrist near the base of the thumb. What are the valves of the venous system? What is their function? The valves of the venous system are structures inside the vein that permit blood to flow only in a normal way from the tissue to the heart, forbid it to return in the reverse way in favor of gravity. The valve closes when the pressure of the fluid column above, after regarding normal flux, is higher than the pressure below them. Valves are thus fundamental for the returning blood to the heart. How do muscles of the legs and the feet contribute to venous return? The muscles of the legs, mainly the muscles of the calves, contract and compresses deep veins of the legs, impelling the blood to the heart. The plantar portion of the feet retains blood, and when it is compressed against the ground, it impels the blood volume and aids in venous return. What are varices? Why are they more common in inferior limbs? Varix means abnormal enlargement of vein. Varices occur when excessive pressure against the normal blood flux creates enlargement in the vein, and thus insufficient functioning of its valve, venous insufficiency. Varices are more common in the vein of the inferior limbs, since fluid column above this vessel is high. This is the reason why people that spend much time standing, for example surgeons, are more susceptible to varices. In general, varices are not apparent to superior veins that appear in the legs of the varix patient. These apparent vessels are the consequences of internal varices, venous insufficiency in the deep internal veins of the legs, and they appear because the blood flux is diverted to superficial veins. Popularly, however, apparent superficial veins are called valleys. What are lymphatic system? The lymphatic system is a network of specialized valved vessels that drain interstitial fluid, the lymph. Lymphatic system is responsible for the transport of chylomicrons, vesicles that contain lipids made after absorption of fats in the intestinal epithelium. In the way of lymphatic vessel, there are ganglion-like structures called the lymph node that contain many cells of the immune system. These cells filter impurities and destroy microorganisms and cellular wastes. The lymphatic vessels drain to two major lymphatic vessels, thoracic duct and right lymphatic duct, that in their turn drains into the tributary vein of the superior vena cava. Why is inflammatory and infectious condition where clinical signs related to lymphatic system occur? Lymph nodes and lymph glands have lymphoid tissue that produce lymphocytes, a type of leukocytes. Inflammatory and infectious condition, the enlargement of the lymph node of the lymphatic circuit that drain the affected region due to reactivity proliferation of leukocyte is common. The enlargement is known as lymphatic ademogaly, and sometimes it is compounded by pain. As such, for the enlarged and painful lymph node is part of the medical examination, since this finding may suggest inflammation, infection, and other diseases. Which are the heart chambers responsible where the entrance and exit of blood occurs? The heart chambers through which blood enters the heart are the atria. There are right atrium and left atrium. The heart chamber through which blood exits the heart are the ventricles, the right ventricle and the left ventricle. Concerning the thickness of their walls, how different are the heart chambers? The ventricle walls are thicker than the atrial walls, since ventricles are structures responsible for pumping of the blood to the lungs and the tissue. Muscular work of the ventricle is harder, and their muscle fiber develop more recall task. The left ventricle is more muscular than the right ventricle. Because pumping blood to the lungs, the right ventricle task is easier, needs less pressure than pumping blood to the other tissue of the body, that is the left ventricle task. What is vena cava? Which type of blood circulates within the vena cava? The vena cava are either of two large veins that diverge into the right atrium. Superior vena cava drains all blood that comes from the head, the superior limbs, the neck, and the superior portion of the trunk. Inferior vena cava carries blood drained from the inferior portion of the trunk and the inferior limbs. Venous blood circulates within the vena cava. Which is the first heart chamber into which blood enters? Where does the blood go after passing through the chamber? What is the name of the valve that separates the compartments? Why is that valve necessary? The venous blood comes from the tissue, arrives to the right atrium of the heart. From the right atrium, the blood goes to the right ventricle. The valves that separate the right ventricle from the right atrium are the tricuspid valve, valvular system made of 3 leaflets. The tricuspid valve is necessary to prevent returning of blood to the right atrium during systole, the contraction of the ventricle. What is the function of the right ventricle? To where does the right ventricle pumps the venous blood? The function of the right ventricle is to get venous blood from the right atrium and pump the blood to be oxygenated in the lungs. Venous blood is carried to the right from the right ventricle to the lungs by the pulmonary artery and their ramifications. What is the valve that separates the right ventricle from the pulmonary artery? Why is that valve important? The valve that separates the right ventricle and the base of the pulmonary artery is the pulmonary valve. Pulmonary valve is important to prevent blood from the pulmonary circulation to flow back to the heart during diastole. The arteries that carry blood from the heart to the lungs contain anterior venous blood. What happens to the blood when it passes through the lungs? Arteries of the pulmonary circulation are arteries that carry venous blood and non-arterial blood. When blood passes through the alveolar capillaries of the lungs, hematosis, that is oxygenation, occurs, and carbon dioxide is released to the exterior. What and how many are the pulmonary veins? Pulmonary veins are part of the pulmonary circulation. They are vessels that carry oxygen-rich arterial blood from the lungs to the heart. There are 4 pulmonary veins, 2 that drain blood from the right lungs and other 2 that drain from the left lungs. The pulmonary vein debouches into the left atrium, bringing arterial blood to the heart. Although they are veins, they carry arterial and non-venous blood. To which heart chamber does blood go after leaving the left atrium? What is the valve that separates these compartments? The arterial blood that comes from the lungs to the left atrium passes them to the left ventricle. Valves between the left ventricle and the left atrium is the mitral valve, a bicuspid, 2 leaflets valve. The mitral valve is important because it prevents the regurgitation of the blood to the left atrium during systole, that is the contraction of the ventricles. What is the function of the left ventricle? Where does blood go after leaving the left ventricle? The function function of the left ventricle is to get blood from the left atrium and pump the blood under high pressure to the systemic circulation. After leaving the left ventricle, blood enters the aorta, the largest artery in the body. What is the valve that separates the aorta from the heart? What is the importance of that valve? The valve between the left ventricle and the aorta is the aortic valve. The aortic valve prevents retrograde flux of blood to the left ventricle during diastole. Besides, as the aortic valve closes during diastole, part of the retrograde blood flux is impelled through the coronary ostia openings, orifice located in the aorta wall, thus after the vesicular insertion and contiguous to the coronary circulation, responsible for the blood supply to the cardiac tissue. Is the ventricle lumen larger during systole or during diastole? Systole is a stage of the cardiac cycle in which the ventricles contract, so the lumen of these chambers are reduced. The pressure upon the blood within them is heightened. During diastole, the opposite occurs. The muscle fibers of the ventricles are relaxed and the lumen of these chambers enlarge, helping the entrance of the blood. What is the stage of the cardiac cycle during which ventricles are filled? The filling of the ventricles with blood is called diastole. Of which type of tissue is the heart made? And how is this tissue oxygenated and nutrified? The heart is made up of striated cardiac muscle tissues. The heart muscles are called myocardium, and it is oxygenated and nutrified by the coronary arteries. Coronary arteries come from the base of the aorta and ramify around the heart, penetrating the myocardium. Diseases of the coronary arteries are severe conditions. Which are the two main metabolic gases transported by the blood? The main metabolic gases transported by the blood are molecular oxygen and carbon dioxide. How do respiratory pigments act? Respiratory pigments are oxygen-carrying molecules present in blood. When oxygen concentration is high, for example, in the pulmonary alveoli, the respiratory pigment binds the gas. In condition of low oxygen concentration, the tissue, the respiratory pigment releases the molecule. In human blood, the respiratory pigment is hemoglobin, present in the red blood cells. How different are oxyhemoglobin and hemoglobin? Where is it expected to find higher concentration of oxyhemoglobin, in peripheral tissue or in the lungs? Oxygen-bounded hemoglobin is called oxyhemoglobin. In the lungs, oxygen concentration is higher, and so there is higher oxyhemoglobin concentration. In peripheral tissues, the situation is the reverse. The concentration of oxygen is lower, and there is more of free hemoglobin. What is hemoglobin? F. Why does the fetus need different hemoglobin? Hemoglobin F is the hemoglobin found in mammalian fetus, and hemoglobin A is the normal hemoglobin. Hemoglobin F has a higher affinity for oxygen. Fetus need hemoglobin capable of extracting oxygen from the mother's circulation. Therefore, the fetus uses hemoglobin F instead, since it has a higher affinity for oxygen than the mother's hemoglobin. In higher altitude, it is necessary for the blood to be more or less hemoglobin. In higher altitude, the air is rarefied and oxygen concentration is lower than in lower altitude. In this situation, the efficiency of respiratory system must be greater. Thus, the organism synthesizes more hemoglobin, more red blood cells, trying to get more oxygen. This phenomenon is known as compensatory hyperglobulinemia. The compensatory hyperglobulinemia is a reason why athletes that will compete in higher altitude needs to arrive in the place some days before the event, so that there is time for their body to make more red blood cells, and they will be less affected by the effect of low atmospheric oxygen concentration, that is fatigue and reduced muscle strength. What is the substance that stimulates the production of red blood cells? Which is the organ that secretes it? Under what condition does this secretion increases? The substances that stimulate the production of red blood cells by the bone marrow is the erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is a hormone secreted by the kidneys. Its secretion is increased when there is deficient tissue oxygenation, tissue hypoxia, caused by a reduced oxygen availability, as it occurs in higher altitude, or by internal diseases, as in pulmonary diseases. Why is carbon monoxide toxic for humans? Hemoglobin likes carbon monoxide much more than likes oxygen. When there is carbon monoxide in inhaled air, it binds to hemoglobin, forming carboxyhemoglobin by occupying the binding site where oxygen would bind. Due to higher hemoglobin affinity for carbon monoxide, thus, the intoxication from car exhaust, there is no oxygen transport, and the individual undergoes hypoxia, loses consciousness, inhales more carbon monoxide, and may even die. Intoxication by carbon monoxide is an important cause of death in fires and closed garage. What is the stage of cellular respiration during which carbon dioxide is liberated? Aerobic respiration releases carbon dioxide, happens in the transformation of pyruvic acid into acetyl-CoA, 2 molecules, and in the Krebs cycle, 4 molecules. For each glucose molecule, 6 carbon dioxide molecules are released. How is carbon dioxide released by cellular respiration, transported from the tissue and eliminated through the lungs? In vertebrates, almost 70% of carbon dioxide is transported by blood in form of the bicarbonate. 25% is bound to hemoglobin, and 5% is dissolved in plasma. What is the difference between double closed circulation and simple closed circulation? Double closed circulation or closed circulation is that in which the blood circulates through 2 associated or parallel vesicular systems. One carries blood to and takes blood to the peripheral tissue. From the peripheral tissue, the systemic circulation, and the other carries blood to and takes blood from the tissues that perform gas exchange with the environment. E.g., the lungs, the pulmonary circulation. Double circulation occurs in amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Simple closed circulation or simple circulation is the one in which the tissue that perform gas exchange are associated with the cells of systematic circulation, as in fish. How many chambers does the fish heart have? The fish heart is a tube made of 2 consecutive chambers, 1 atria, 1 ventricle. Does the fish heart pump venous or arterial blood? The venous blood coming from the tissue enters the atria, passes the ventricle, then pumps the blood to the gills. After oxygenation, the arterial blood goes to the tissues, and the fish heart pumps venous blood. Why is the fish circulation classified as simple and complete circulation? Circulation is that in which there is no mixture of venous blood and arterial blood. Simple circulation is that in which blood circulates in only one circuit, as opposed to double circulation that have 2 circuits, the systemic circulation and the pulmonary circulation. In fish, circulatory system is simple and complete. How many heart chambers does amphibian artery have? The amphibian heart has 3 heart chambers, 2 atria and 1 ventricle. Why can amphibian circulation be classified as double and incomplete? Amphibian circulation is double because it is composed of the systemic and pulmonary circulation, respectively. Heart tissues, heart, and heart-lung heart. Since amphibians have only one ventricle in the heart, venous blood taken from the tissue and arterial blood coming from the lungs are mixed in the ventricle and then pumps the mixture back to the systemic and the pulmonary circulation. Amphibian circulation is classified incomplete because the venous and arterial blood mix in the circuit. Blood oxygenation in amphibian occurs also in the systemic circulation since their skin is a gas exchange organ. What is the difference between amphibian heart and reptile heart? The reptile have a double and incomplete circulation too. 3 heart chamber, 2 atria, and 1 ventricle. The reptile heart, however, presents the beginning of ventricular separation or septation that partially separates the right and the left region of the chamber. With the partial ventricular septation, the mixture of arterial with venous blood in reptile heart is less than in amphibians. How many chambers do bird heart and mammalian heart have? Concerning temperature maintenance, what is the advantage of double and complete circulation of these animals? The bird and the mammalian heart are divided into 4 chambers: right atria, right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle. Birds and mammals are homeothermic, that is, they control their body temperature. 4-chambered heart and double circulation provide supply of more oxygenated blood to the tissue, making it possible higher metabolic rate, mainly cellular respiration rate. Partly, the energy produced by cellular respiration is also used to maintain the body temperature. Concerning the mixture of arterial with venous blood, what is the difference between human fetal circulation and adult circulation? In human fetal circulation, there are 2 communications between the arterial and venous blood, characterizing an incomplete circulation. One of them is the ovoforamen, an opening between the right and the left atria of the fetal heart. The other is the arterial ducts, short vessels connecting the pulmonary artery to the aorta. This communication closes a few days after birth, and so they are not present in adult heart. How is heart contraction triggered? The heart contraction is independent from the nervous stimulation, although it can be modulated by the autonomic or autonomous nervous system. The heart, they are pacemaker cells that trigger by themselves the action potential that begins the muscle contraction. These cells are concentrated in two special points of the heart: the sinoatrial node, located at the superior portion of the right atrium, and the atrioventricular node, a V node, located near the interarterial septum. The action potential generated by depolarization of SAN cells propagate the cell-to-cell through the atriole, producing atrial contraction. The atrial depolarization also propagates the AV node that transmits the electrical impulse to the ventricle through specialized conduction bundles of the interventricular septum, or the bundle of His, and then to the pancreatic tissue of the ventricle wall, causing ventricular contraction. The arterial contraction precedes the ventricular contraction for the blood to flow to fill the ventricles before the ventricle contraction. Repolarization of the SAN makes the atriole relax, and then the ventricle relax too. Thank you very much for participating in Circulatory System. Please do like, share, and subscribe.